When you get the clash of this very cold air with the warm air, especially moisture-laden warm air from very warm oceans, that's just the ingredients for a perfect massive storm system, which we saw.
Welcome to Facing Future. I'm Dale Wolkinen. Climate deniers like to point to freezing temperatures as a sign that global warming, as Republicans in this country like to call it, is a scam. But not understanding science is a disaster. As the rapidly warming Arctic pushes its glacial weather south, more extreme and dangerous cold moves into areas like the southern states where infrastructure is not equipped for it. This January's storm encompassed nearly 2,000 miles at its height, from Mexico to Canada. Millions lost power as it snapped trees and power lines and left at least 62 people dead. Meteorologists warn that widespread, unusually cold temperatures will affect more than 190 million Americans this winter. And it's not a passing event. As nighttime temperatures plunge into the single digits for days, heavy sleet and snow remain frozen solid. I want to once again welcome climate scientist Paul Beckwith to help us understand what's happening and what's to come. Paul, we've had crippling storms in the past. How is this one different, if it is?
Well, I love the way that this was put in an article in Yale Climate Connections by Bob Henson. He's talking about how winter weather has to push uphill in our warming climate. So, of course, our overall climate is warming, but we can still get these weather extremes. And our warming climate is unequally warming. So we know that the poles are warming much faster than the equator, for example. And when the poles warm much faster, what happens to that cold air that normally sits over the Arctic? Well, normally there's something called the stratospheric polar vortex, which circles the North Pole. Also, there's one in the southern hemisphere, the South Pole. But it's called the stratospheric polar vortex. Very, very fast winds, very, very high up in the stratosphere, well above the troposphere top, which is where weather is confined to. And what happens is sometimes that vortex elongates, as it did in this case, and sometimes it splits into two. And then there's downward propagating atmospheric waves, which can push the jet stream into becoming much wavier, forming a large trough. And that trough is extending deep into the southern U.S., bringing very, very cold air. And then when you get the clash of this very cold air with moisture-laden warm air from very warm oceans, that's just the ingredients for a massive storm system, which we saw. So these things do still happen. When they do, they're often much larger and more intense than we've seen in the past.
Well, in places like Mississippi and Tennessee, they're totally unprepared for this kind of weather and are completely shocked by it. These are Republican states, so these people are voting for their own disastrous situations, and they don't realize it. I wonder what you think about how might these communities prepare as
Yes.
temperatures drop. What could they have done in advance of these storms to make sense of save lives?
I mean, some people, if you're in Texas, you're comparing this storm to the big winter storm in February of 2021 that actually took out large parts of the Texas power grid. I mean, this particular storm probably will set records for total damage and also for prolonged cold. And we'll talk about the duration of the cold because it's still going on at least for another week. Nashville, Tennessee was one of the largest cities that was hit the worst. Overall, 150 million people across central and eastern USA have had to endure snow, freezing rain, sleet, or bitter cold since Friday, January 23rd. So on the Sunday alone, January 25th, 11,000 flights were grounded across the U.S., and that's the most since the pandemic. There's been a multi-day standstill in many different towns and cities, and as you mentioned, quite a few deaths. So the Texas storm in February 2021 was the costliest if you convert it to today's dollars with inflation, it's $28 billion. And a guy at NOAA had $1 billion disaster website, and he's since moved to Climate Central, where the website is migrated to. So that has all of the numbers and compares all of the $1 billion weather disasters. So this
Yeah,
storm was
because then
very,
we need to have people migrate out of NOAA, and because
yeah.
this administration has killed the funding and tries to hide the data to pretend
Yeah,
it's
I
not
mean
happening.
Noah unfortunately he basically lost his job because of government cuts, and the present government of course doesn't like people in STEM, science, technology, engineering, math unless they're directly tied to AI. So you mentioned the size of the storm. It was massive. It went up into Canada as well. I'll talk about that in a minute. There's a website called poweroutage.us. I looked at it like 10 minutes ago, and as of 10 minutes ago, so we're 4 days later than the 4 or 5 days later than the storm hit. There's 326,465 customers still without power right now as we're filming this video. Now, this is customers. So, what's a customer? It's like
Yeah,
a household. And what's the
household.
average? The average household's what, two and a half, three people? Then that's about 1 million people right now without power still. And they haven't had power for going on to 4 days. And at the peak, we're talking about over 2.5 million people without power. One of the hardest hit big cities was like Nashville. So to give you an idea, 90% of the customers lost power. Images on social media from Nashville look like a war zone, basically. An ice zone, I'll say, without pun intended. And I posted some of the images, and somebody said, "Oh, that's AI. Take that down, Beckwith. I can't believe you're doing
Mm,
that." So I took it down, and then I checked later, and it was actually valid. So,
mhm.
ironically, the American Meteorological Society their meeting started on Monday, and so many
Yes,
people were flying to
they
the
couldn't come.
meeting in Houston,
Yeah.
and they were a part of the people that couldn't make it because of the 11,000 flights grounded. So some of the hazards for people, I mean, the people that have died, some of the hazards are hypothermia, right? You just get colder and colder, your core body temperature drops. Normally it's 98.6, it drops to 94 to 92. Your brain stops functioning enough to tell you that you're in dire danger of dying. And, many
Yeah,
people can
people
just,
go out in the cold, people drive in the cold. There were numerous, multiple pileups of cars, and if you're stuck in a car and you can't move, you're in a very bad situation. People have
yes.
to take these storms seriously. I guess that's, the takeaway.
And,
You don't
and
go out in
also,
this.
And I highly recommend that people have portable carbon monoxide monitors because that
Yeah.
would have saved a lot of lives because carbon monoxide poisoning is a big problem, especially from unsafe use of, many people have generators now in their houses or in their garage. And if you run a gas-powered generator in an enclosed space, you're going to get carbon dioxide fumes, toxic fumes, but also CO, which is invisible and can make you unconscious before you even know levels are too high. So depending on where you were, some places got up to 2 feet of snow. Washington, D.C. got 4 inches of sleet. And the density of sleet, it's really heavy stuff. And in fact, in Arkansas, you had it on roofs and you had multiple roof collapses because of the weight of the snow. And then other places, of course, just had the freezing rain. So, and this is continuing. So,
I think one of the things I'd like to talk about is how communities can prepare for this sort of thing. For example, if you have a giant screen TV, maybe during a storm, it's not the best time to open that up and watch TV and heat your house to 70 degrees. Maybe people need to think about, oh, wow, we're having a power problem. Let's try to use less electricity right now so that there be more for critical uses. Certainly, data centers, which use enormous amounts of electricity, don't need to be operating in an emergency, perhaps. There are various things that could be done automatically. Like, there's an emergency, folks. Stop using your appliances that you don't need to, and just be a little smarter and a little more community minded. In my community, my neighbors came and helped me dig out. It was like really great because we were under a lot of snow, and trying to get my car out was not even a possibility because of the stupid snowplow. It created problems, but I was really aware of the intensity and of need for community awareness and togetherness during an emergency, and to be prepared in advance is so important.
Yes, you mentioned the bomb cyclone. So this
Mhm.
storm actually caused some unusual behavior around the Great Lakes region. So just north of the border, we had the heaviest snowfall in record since 1937 in Toronto. So Toronto's just on the north side of Lake Ontario. The airport in Toronto had 46 centimeters or 18 inches. That's a foot and a half of snow. And parts of downtown Toronto, which is right along the lake, just on the northern coast of Lake Ontario, 56 centimeters, almost 2 feet of snow there. And last time we had that
It has
much
that
snow.
lake effect, right? With
Yeah,
the
so what's
all the
happening? So
states.
the lake effect is normally you have Lake Ontario is deeper than Lake Erie, so it generally
Hmm.
doesn't freeze. The water stays warm throughout the winter. Now, you have these frigid winds over the lake, and then you can get intense bands of snow. Now, normally we have westerly or northwesterly winds. That's the prevailing weather patterns. So
Hmm.
they go over the lake. So the heaviest snow, this lake effect, is on the U.S. side of the lake. So Buffalo to Watertown, New York, gets massive amounts of snow. But what we had in this storm is we had easterly winds instead. So the lake effect was actually on the Canadian side, which is very unusual. So Toronto, Hamilton, Burlington, Oakville, where I grew up. And normally, when you have an easterly wind and the lake effect hitting the Canadian side, there's warmer air aloft that's above. So the zone where snow is produced is narrower. It doesn't extend above the surface that high. It's a shallow snow layer, so you don't get much snow, but not this time. This time there was so much cold air from this storm up to about a mile above the ground was where the snow is being produced. So we had a specific type of snow. It's called dendritic snow. Normally 1 inch of water, we say rule of thumb is an inch of water, 10 inches of snow. But this snow was so light and fluffy, it was actually a 30-to-1 ratio in this case. So Toronto just got so much snow. I mean, it was all of these conditions were like that. But then other areas had different effects. So further south, like the snow was very, very heavy for many U.S. cities. It was so we'd had very, very heavy snow, much heavier than the normal 10-to-1 ratio. And like in some places we had sleet, in other places we had freezing rain, as I've already mentioned. So like Washington, D.C., what happens is the air is very cold at the ground, and then there's a layer of warmer air above in this case, and then there was a layer of colder air up higher. So it started snowing in the highest cold layer, and then it goes through the warm layer. So in places over like Washington, D.C., the snow coming down in the highest layer partially melted but didn't completely melt. And then it passes from the warm layer into the cold layer. Then it refroze, and this is we call it ice pellets or sleet. So this happened over Washington, and it was a long duration event, and they got 4 inches of sleet on Washington D.C. And the weight of the sleet is about 3 times the weight of the snow. So anybody trying to shovel the snow that has cardiovascular problems is very
Yeah.
at risk of heart attacks if they're out of
Many
shape.
people did die from shoveling snow, and that's a
Yeah,
common thing that does
right.
happen.
Yeah, and
Also, I
then
wanted to mention that we're not having phenomena only in North America. In Saudi Arabia, they had incredible snow recently, more snow than they had in 30 years, which was a very unusual event. And because the Middle East is also experiencing more moisture in the atmosphere than it has before, suddenly cold weather comes and it results in snow. Warmer air, of course, contains more moisture. So strange phenomena are happening all over the
yeah, I
world.
just want to say too that the Nashville case, like the places that got mostly freezing rain, it's a very similar atmospheric structure to what I described over Washington.
Hmm.
There's a subtle difference. So the upper layer is cold and is generating snow, and then it comes through warmer air in a middle layer, but the air is slightly warm, and the thickness of the warm air is enough so that the snow is completely melted to water. And then that water hits the cold layer, and instead of freezing, it's moving quite fast. It gets super cooled, and then when it hits the ground, it freezes instantly. And this is the freezing rain situation, which I've mentioned. They had up to 1.24 inches of freezing rain in Oxford, and when you get rain, an inch of freezing rain, it coats everything. It brings down power lines. Over 100 power lines were brought down in Nashville. And, you mentioned mitigation, maybe burying lines. These storms are quite rare, and it's very expensive to bury power lines as opposed to having just put up the telephone poles, sort of, or power poles. And so there are things we can do, but you have to weigh the costs. So it depended where you are. And like I say, this is continuing. It's really important to get these messages out to the public. So I'm very glad that you're doing this video. And on my own channel, I did a video, and I'm going to take my dog for a walk in a really snowy park. And I'm going to do a rant video about some of the topics that we're discussing here and post that. I think educating people should go and get some good gloves, go get a good hat, get some sort of jacket. It can stay in your closet for 5, 10 years, but when you get an event
Yeah.
like this, you're not going to freeze to death, right? And don't just start a generator indoors, right? A generator has to be outside. There has to be proper airing for a generator. So what some people do is they'll build a little wooden structure in their backyard which houses the generator, and then there's air vents and stuff, and it's protected from the elements, and make sure it's filled with gas, and check that it operates every year or so, start it up and run it for a little bit. If your generator is providing power and you've got electric heaters, you don't need to heat your whole house. I have an old house that was built in 1911, so I have doors in every room. So I can just shut doors and isolate one room, and like just heat one room in my house if the power is
Yeah.
out.
Well,
Also,
yeah, but if the power's out, you don't have the electricity to to run that.
yeah, so you
Or
have
you
a
have to have a generator.
generator. Make sure you
Yeah.
have a long extension cord so you can run your generator outside safely and have the extension cord going up a couple floors or whatever to a
Mm.
bedroom, which is then isolated, and just heat one small living space. The other thing is the generators can be costly. So figure out how much electricity the generator produces and for how long, and get a generator where you can plug in 3 or 4 different extension cords, and you can split the cost with 3 or 4 neighbors and have
Mm.
cords and just run the generator and have a cord going to each person, and each person can draw enough to run a portable heater. So that would offset the cost a bit. The other very crucial thing is you got to worry about your water pipes freezing. Because if
Yes.
your water pipes freeze, this is massive costs, massive costs. So it's very easy to stop your water pipes from freezing. All you need to do is you need to open each of the taps in your house just a tiny amount, so each tap is dripping. Not the You don't want the water running, but you want it dripping
Yeah.
from each faucet
Right.
of your
Just
house,
some kind of moving water.
right? Because
Yeah.
the pipes are under the ground from the city feeding your house, and that water is warm enough to, if it's trickling through your pipes, it will stop them freezing up. So
Right.
this is a
Right.
very simple thing to do, so that your pipes don't freeze. And
You
this was
can
a huge.
also insulate your pipes. That you should make sure that you have,
Well, the
an
pipes are
insulating
mostly
layer over
buried
your pipes.
in. That's not very practical because the pipes are mostly
Uh-huh.
in walls and things like that.
Uh-huh.
The other thing that you could do if it got extremely cold is turn off the main valve from the city to your house, and just open the lowest taps in the house and drain all the water out of all the pipes. Right? You could
Hmm.
try to
Yeah.
drain all the water. This is if you go into very cold temperatures for long duration, the little
Hmm.
dripping might not be effective. So there's lots of different things that we can do, and for homeless people, we need libraries or shelters within the city that have generators and that can provide some heat so people can just walk in. We don't want people freezing to death out in the streets. Ignore climate change if you want, but these are extreme weather events that are going to hit.
Yeah.
And we've got to be, there's a lot of simple things we can do to prepare and to actually stop the problem from cascading into a far worse problem.
Well, that's what we try to warn people about so that people are more prepared and people start thinking about these kinds of things because these kinds of storms are going to happen more frequently in the future as the climate gets worse because we're not stopping global temperatures from rising. We've already probably passed 1.5, although people are disputing that. But whatever the number is, we know that it's accelerating. Unless we stop using fossil fuels to the extent that we're using them, we are going to have these kinds of problems in the future.
Climate change, global warming is causing uneven heating. The poles are warming 3 or 4 times faster. And therefore, the whole way that air moves, air circulates, jet streams move, is changing. And we're getting a lot more disruptions. We're getting a lot more contrast between warm and cold air. We have a lot more moisture in the air. Just think about moisture. Like water evaporates from the warmer oceans, goes into the air. When it rises, it gets colder and it condenses into water droplets. And when you get water going from gas phase, like the water vapor, to liquid water drops, it releases tremendous amounts of energy, which then fuel these much larger storms that occur. So just a stat I'd like to give. Washington, D.C. has records going back to 1872. And if you look at the 60 record cold years, only one of the 60 record cold years has occurred this century. And if you look at the record warm years, 16 have had record warm years. So, I mean, that's a clear and irrefutable indication that the overall trends are getting warmer and warmer and warmer. But we still have these cold air events. The Arctic is warming much faster
Well,
than the rest of the planet. The cold air
right. So
doesn't
we have to
disappear,
remind people that the
right?
warming doesn't mean that it's always going to be hot. It means that
Yeah,
that Arctic air is going to get into other places where it never was before, and we're going to have extremely cold events
right,
as
right.
well. It's, as you
Yeah,
say, weather weirding, not
weather
global
weirding,
warming
weather
that we need to think
wilding,
about.
weather
Yeah,
whiplashing. So,
right.
so,
Yeah,
uh,
yeah.
but we're not out of the woods because those people without power, what are these people doing, and when will they get their power back? So we need to work on trying to make the power grids more resilient to these sort of events. And we know the power grids are also hit from wildfires and from high winds blowing over power lines, and there's all these other different things. So the power grid is very shaky.
Yeah.
Shall we
So
say.
we need to pay attention to the infrastructure and if I may, less to ice in the most horrible sense of its manifestation in the United States. In Minnesota, we've seen the deaths of people at the hands of government agents who have enormous amounts of resources at their beck and call, rather than taking care of what needs to be taken care of. We're trying to take people out of the country who have been here for years, and it's such a sad thing and such a crisis for us. So on that unhappy note, let's not have that kind of ice in America anymore, I would hope. Thank you, Paul, for being here today.
Thank you.